Hi, I'm Jara from Biodome, and I'm here today to teach you about making steaks. You know, it might be a little bit strange that the microgreens and produce people are teaching you about how to cook steaks, but you know what goes great on steaks? Butter goes fantastic on steaks, but not just any type of butter. We are going to make a fun compound butter using our micro basil. So this is going to be an additional part to the Can You Cook Microgreens series that we have, and we're going to see if we can cook micro basil into a compound butter. We're also going to be testing to see whether or not we can just use fresh micro basil into a compound butter. So if you don't know what a compound butter is, basically it's just a butter that's mixed or infused with something else. This could be an herb, this could be garlic, you could use spices in there as well, but it makes for a great flavorful topping to go on top of a steak. So we're gonna use compound butter on top of these nice New York strip steaks that I have here. We're gonna do a taste test to see how the different types of micro basil compound butters come out. Do you want to cook your micro basil into the compound butter, or is it better to just add in some fresh micro basil into a compound butter? Let's go ahead and get started with these steaks. First thing you want to do for any good steak is you're going to pat them dry. You want to get any and all of that excess moisture off of your steaks so that the salt can really penetrate into the steak. So as you can see, we have our infused salt over here on this side with our parsley in it, and then we have our normal salt over here on the other side, and we're going to season each of these steaks with one of these salts. And then we're going to add black pepper, garlic powder, onion powder, but let's go ahead and season up these steaks. Then we're going to take our steaks and we're going to toss them in an oven or an air fryer at 225 or 250 degrees, depending on what you're looking for out of the steaks, how quickly you want them to be done. For this thickness, we'll probably be back in an hour to 2 hours at this point for them to fully cook through. To get to a nice medium rare, and then we'll sear them off afterwards. This is called the reverse sear method that we're using. So while the steaks are in the oven, while we've got about hour and a half, we're going to try out these various different micro basil compound butters. One, we're going to actually cook the basil, the micro basil, in with the butter, and then turn it into a compound butter from there. And then on the other one, we're just going to use fresh basil, fresh micro basil in with the butter. So our first step here is just going to be to chop up our micro basil so that we can use it for both these various different types of compound butters. Should be a good enough amount there. So let's get this nice and finely chopped. So we're going to take about half of this, put it in there, stick of butter, and that's going to go on the stove to cook. While we're going to take this part with softened butter, and we will just mix in our micro basil into this. So to make our one compound butter with the fresh basil or fresh micro basil, I just popped the butter in the microwave for a couple of seconds just to soften it up. And you can put it in the food processor, or you can just mix it up by hand like I'm doing here. And now that we've got our basil mixed in, we need to wait for it to cool down a little bit so that we can roll it up in saran wrap and then get that in the fridge to set. For our second compound butter, we're going to take this, get it on the stove, and we'll start to cook it. And then we'll check back in a little bit. We'll put this on low, and we'll just let it melt and cook the microgreens into it. And we'll see how it turns out. Okay, so this butter with the micro basil in it has been brought to a simmer. It's been simmering for about 5 minutes now, which means that the microgreens have been cooked a little bit, and we don't want to brown this butter or anything like that. We just want to leave the butter nice and simple for the compound butter. So we're going to turn this off, and we'll let it sit so that it can cool down for us to get it into the cling wrap and into the freezer. Now that our first set of compound butter with the fresh micro basil in it has cooled down just a little bit, we're going to take that and we're just going to spread it out onto some plastic wrap. And you want to sort of keep it as together as possible. And then we're going to take the plastic wrap, roll it over, and we want to try and make it into a little log here. So then we'll roll it up, and we can make this log nice by just tying off both of these ends. Now we've got our compound butter that's ready to go in the freezer. As you can see, we have our two beautiful steaks that came out of the oven. We went low and slow for about an hour, hour and a half, and then we seared them off real high, real fast at the very end of the cook to get a nice crust on the outside. But that's not what you came for. You came to see what these things look like on the inside. And that is a perfect medium rare. Now it's time to try our two different compound butters. On this side, we have the fresh micro basil compound butter, and on this side, we have the cooked micro basil compound butter. The cooked micro basil compound butter did not have quite as much time to freeze as the other one, so it's not quite as solid, but we torched it on top of the steaks. So let's go ahead and try the cooked one first. The basil flavor is good. But it gets stuck in your teeth, definitely a little bit wilty. So let's now see what the fresh basil one tastes like. So there's a bit more freshness that comes through, obviously with the fresh micro basil compound butter. The wilted or the cooked basil compound butter is still very good. But between the two of them, I really like the pop of freshness that the fresh micro basil compound butter adds. I think that this is actually a decent way if you're going to cook microgreens. Cooking them into a compound butter might actually be a solid idea. However, in this specific experiment, between the two of them, I'm going to err on the side of the fresh micro basil compound butter. Hey guys, I just wanted to give a quick update on the basil infused butter. I've got it on some toast here, and the basil infused compound butter is absolutely phenomenal on bread, on toast. I think it would go really well with an avocado toast as underneath of the avocado spread. Could definitely use the micro basil compound butter for a number of things, for any and all of your breakfast opportunities. So I'm actually going to go ahead and say that the cooked micro basil butter is a success, and we have found our very first way to truly cook microgreens and make them taste good. So that's been episode 2 of Can We Cook Microgreens? And I'm happy to say that we found our very first way that I would actually recommend cooking microgreens with this micro basil compound butter. If you want to spice it up, I recommend maybe adding some fresh garlic or red chili flakes if you actually like to add some heat to it. But it turned out great, and cooking it into the compound butter was not a significant difference from the fresh micro basil in the compound butter. So I'm happy that in our second video, we found our first good way to cook microgreens. If you like this video, remember to like and subscribe to our channel to help us grow. And if you're in the South Jersey or Philadelphia area, feel free to swing by our warehouse in Pennsauken and come see the biodome yourself. Come get some fresh tomatoes, fresh herbs, fresh microgreens. We'd be happy to have you. Keep growing.